So the first thing that I'm starting off with today is some sunscreen because that is super important, and I use the Neutrogena Hydro Boost Water Gel Sunscreen in SPF 50, and I just make sure to apply that all over my face and down my neck as well. By the way, the reason why I love this sunscreen is that it doesn't leave that awful white cast on my skin that most sunscreens do, so I don't feel the need to always cover it up with foundation. I can leave the house wearing only sunscreen if I wanted to. Once I was done with the sunscreen, I moved on to concealer, and I like to use the Covergirl Trublend Undercover Concealer in the shade Warm Honey, and this is what I use to prime my eyelids, but I'm applying a little bit under my eyes as well, and normally I would just blend it out with my fingers. However, I was like, okay, let me try something a little bit different this time, so I whipped out this bootleg beauty blender, but I was not a fan of this method. The sponge feels so stiff and it's really thick, so it's hard to get into any of the little crevices on my face, like in the inner corners of my eyes. And yeah, it was just really hard to blend everything out. I felt like I was just completely wiping off the concealer off of my face. Now, it totally could just be user error on my end, but I just ended up going back in with some more concealer and just used my trusty fingers to blend everything out instead. So here I'm just setting my concealer with some translucent powder, and I'm not even going to bother mentioning the product that I'm using because it's some old dinky little discontinued product that I'm trying to just use up. So I just applied it over my concealer, and then I also added it to my eyebrows because that area also gets oily super easily. And then I noticed that my head was also shining, so I hit that with some powder as well, so you guys wouldn't be blinded by the light bouncing off my forehead. I just naturally have very oily skin, so I'm just constantly using powder just to help mattify it. So next we're going to move on to eyeshadow, and the palette that I'm going to be using today is the Makeup Revolution Shook eyeshadow palette. So I started with Sidetracked, and I took it on a medium kind of fluffy blending brush, and I'm using it as a transition shade, so I applied it right into the crease of my eye as well as slightly above the crease. Next, I went back into the palette and chose the shade Reckless. It's just a slightly more brownish shade compared to Sidetracked, which had a little bit more of an orangey tint to it. So I'm using the same blending brush to apply it, and I'm mostly focusing the shade on the outer V of my eye and buffing out the remainder on the brush throughout the rest of my crease. Using two shades like I did just helps add a little bit more depth and dimension to the look. And here I also started replicating the same steps on my other eye just to see how it was looking, because this was actually my first time ever creating this look and using this palette for that matter. So I just wanted to make sure it looked like I actually had envisioned it in my head. The next shade that I went into was Fresh, and it's a really pale neutral shade. I know it looks practically white in this image, but if you compare it to the shade Winter here, you can really see the difference. So to apply Fresh, I used a smudging brush and just applied that directly onto my eyelids. Initially, I did put Fresh all over my eyelids, thinking that that would look good, but then after doing both eyes, I realized that it didn't, so I ended up going back into Reckless and adding it to my outer V once again. And obviously, if you're recreating this look, you don't have to do the steps in the exact same order that I did. You could, maybe try doing it right the first time, unlike me. Next, I wanted to move on to my brows, but I noticed that they were a little bit longer than I wanted them to be, so I usually just shave them instead of plucking them. Ideally, I would have done this before I started my makeup, but I completely forgot, so surprise, surprise, I kind of screwed up this part as well, but it's okay, no biggie. I still shaved them off and then just went back in with a little bit more eyeshadow. And then to actually fill in my brows, I use the Annabelle eyebrow pencil in the shade medium brown. This is my go-to, and this step is pretty straightforward. I just fill in my brows and then clean up around them with some foundation or concealer, whatever I feel like at the time. And I believe this time I just used some foundation. here I just went back into the shade Fresh and I'm just applying it right under the arches of my brows. And of course I did go back in with a blending brush as well just to make sure it blends in nicely with the rest of the eyeshadow. Next up, it's time for some eyeliner, and I'm using the e.l.f. Precision Liquid Eyeliner, and I just did a very thin line along the lash line with a small wing as well. Now, that is what I normally would do, but I think especially for a soft glam look like this, it is nicer to have a more subtle eyeliner look as opposed to something a bit more dramatic. Next, I just curled my lashes a little bit before I moved on to mascara. And then for mascara, I use the Covergirl Lash Blast Volume Waterproof Mascara, and the waterproof part is super important because it's going to help my lashes hold a curl throughout the entire day. Now, unfortunately, I did get some mascara on my eyelids, which is incredibly annoying, and normally people say if you just kind of wait for it to dry, you can scratch it off and it will flake right off, but I'm too impatient to wait for it to dry, so I just went in with my finger and kind of smudged it off, and then went in with some more eyeshadow to cover it up. For lashes, I actually used individuals, so the ones I used are the Ardell Knot Free Flares in medium black, and this is just going to add a very natural looking flare to the eyes, which I think is perfect for a soft glam look like this, and I glued that on with the Duo Clear Lash Glue. Sorry, I want to pause for a sec. I know in this video my lashes, as you can see here, don't look that great. I reused these individuals without cleaning them, so they had some residual glue on them, and I also didn't use enough lashes. So it looks really obvious and bad, and I didn't realize it at the time. So this angle really doesn't help. I'm sorry, don't drag me, but I recently posted a video on how to actually use individuals, and I know you're probably like, well, why would I want to watch it now? But they look a lot better there, I promise. So if you're interested, definitely go check that out after this video. As for my bottom lashes, I do use a different mascara. So this is the Maybelline New York Legal Length Fiber Extensions Mascara. So once I was done with that, I moved on to the rest of my face. So I'm starting off by color correcting, and I'm using this reddish orange shade to help cancel out the dark pigmentation that I have around my mouth. Now, the product that I'm using is discontinued, but it's not the best to be honest anyways, and I'm just trying to use it up before I can purchase something new, so I just have to work with what I've got. Next, I went back in with the Covergirl concealer that I used in the beginning, and I'm just applying that on my cheeks and a little bit more under my eyes, and then just blending it out with my fingers. Then moving on to foundation, I'm using the Maybelline Fit Me foundation in the shade 330 Toffee, and I just like to dot that all over my face with my fingers and then buff it out with a foundation brush. Here, I'm actually just going in with a concealer brush and just, adding some foundation between my eyebrows, because obviously I can't do that with the big foundation brush. And yeah, just cleaning up any other places that I feel like look streaky or patchy. For contour, I'm going to be using the L'Oreal Paris Infallible Shaping Stick Foundation in the shade 420 Chestnut. And I just applied that directly to the hollows of my cheeks, around my forehead, and I also applied a little bit on the sides of my nose. And then yeah, I just blended it out. So for most of my face, I used a stippling brush to blend out the product, and then for my nose, I just used a liquid foundation brush. Okay, so now to set the contour, I actually went back into the eyeshadow palette and used the shade Sidetrack, which was the first shade that I had used on my eyes, and I have to say, I love the way this tied the eye look to the rest of my face, and I think this is a key part in making this look work and look really cohesive. Also, if you don't have an eyeshadow this shade, but you have a bronzer, you could just do your eyeshadow with the bronzer instead and achieve the same look. So next I moved on to setting the rest of my face, and I used the Maybelline Fit Me Loose Finishing Powder in the shade 35 Deep, and I applied it under my jawline and under my eyes, and yeah, pretty much everywhere else. And I know what you're thinking, shouldn't she have done this before she set her contour? And yeah, you're probably right, But a recurring theme on this channel is that I don't really know what I'm doing, but I think it still works out in the end. By the way, I know the powder under my jawline is looking really ashy here, but it didn't look that bad off camera. And I've used this powder a few times before, so I think it's mostly just the lighting in this shot that's making it look a little bit off. Now I'm going to jump to the lips for a minute here. So first I went in with this Annabelle lip liner in the shade Spice. It's a really nice light pink shade, and I lined my lips and kind of filled them in as well. And then I went in with this NYX Lip Lingerie, which is a matte liquid lipstick in the shade Beauty Mark. I did go for a matte lip, but I think this look would also be really nice with a glossy lip. So if you do try this look, that is something I would recommend trying out as well. Now, I wasn't done with my lips just yet, so I went in with the NYX Soft Matte Lip Cream in the shade London. And for the most part, I focused it on like the center of my lips to kind of give a slight ombre effect. And at this point, I still wasn't completely satisfied with what it looked like, so I did come back to it a little bit later. But for now, we're going to jump to blush. So for blush, I used this Wet n Wild Color Icon blush in the shade Mellow, and I love this blush for a few reasons. It's affordable, the color's great, and it's also vegan and cruelty free. So if you're looking for a new affordable blush, I definitely recommend checking this one out. In terms of blush placement, I actually didn't put on too much, but I'm focusing it high up on my cheekbones, putting a little bit up to my temples, and I also like to put whatever remains on the brush onto my forehead, so it's not too much. Now here, I did notice that the color around my mouth was all wrong. Even though I tried to avoid this issue by color correcting, it just wasn't the right shade for me right now, so I just slightly deepened the foundation around my mouth by going in with the darker shade that I had used to contour. And then the very last step I did for this makeup look is I went in with one more lip product. It is the NYX Soft Matte Lip Cream in the shade Berlin, and I promise I stopped here. I know I used quite a few lip products, but it just wasn't looking right, you know? Anyways, with that being said, here is the final look. So that is all for this video. If you enjoyed it, please make sure you leave it a like, comment, and subscribe, and I will catch you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching. Bye.